So let's get some perspective. Congressman Ed Royce, he is the chairman of the House Foreign Affairs Committee, joining us now. Chairman, nice to meet you. Thank you for being with us on New Day. Let me get reacts from you on two big points out of the interview with the president. The first one, let's play some sound about his feelings about intelligence lapses.
Well, I think our head of the intelligence community, Jim Clapper, has acknowledged that I think they underestimated what had been taking place in Syria.
A lot of people in the intel community pushing back on that. What's your take?
Well, I happen to know that in Baghdad, the request was made from our embassy for strikes early on against ISIS as they were coming over the border. And this wasn't unknown by the administration. Myself and others also had made requests for the use of drones to hit those units as they were going city by city. And they were open targets out on the open road, and the administration decided not to do it. And as a consequence, you had 16 cities fall. The last one to fall was Mosul, in which the central bank was taken over by ISIS. So yes, if the advice early on had been taken in terms of the power and, you know, certainly the recruiting capability of ISIS, I think we could have done more to retard, to degrade, to slow their advance.
Intelligence failure, political failure on the part of the White House?
Well, I think that's political failure. And early on, of course, you know, his former Secretary of State, Hillary Clinton, had urged action on some of this in that region. Certainly Petraeus did, as did his Secretary of Defense. This had to do with arming those who could have been a counterweight in the region. Now this takes us to the interesting question of whether or not we're going to arm the Kurds with the weapons they need to defend themselves, or the Yazidis, or the Christians.
What's your take?
I think we need to circumvent Baghdad. Do not be deferential to the government in Baghdad, but instead insist that the weapons needed to defend the Kurdish people and the other religious minorities get into their hands. If you allow Baghdad to exercise this veto, they will not allow those weapons to be transferred to those ethnic minorities.
But how do you not respect the sovereignty of the Iraqi government that you just helped put in place, hoping it will improve the situation?
Because the time comes when you just have to lead and be insistent on a course of action that is going to stop the ISIS advance. And what we have found is if we do not push on the government in Baghdad, and if we don't assert, and we're going to do it legislatively, frankly, Democrats and Republicans in Congress want to see the Kurds armed. They want to see the Christians armed. Why do we feel that way? Because A, we're not supportive of the idea of putting the 82nd Airborne in there. We think these people should be allowed to defend themselves, and we think a good amount of this was malfeasance on the part of the government in Baghdad in terms of not allowing these local forces to have the weapons they need to defend themselves.
But this gets tricky, because if you want to circumvent the Iraqi government on the one hand, but you know that you need the Iraqi government to create the kind of political change to allow the Sunnis to have some control so you don't have the next ISIS, you can't undermine the same government you want to be strong enough to help itself.
But that goes back to General Petraeus' original point of why we should have kept a small contingent force right in Baghdad itself, to have that leverage. We've lost that leverage. So now we have to make the most of a difficult equation here, which you've outlined very effectively there. But at the end of the day, if they continue to lose ground, if minorities continue to be slaughtered, you're left with a question: if the United States can give them the capability to defend themselves, and if they're killing ISIS troops, and if you don't have the leadership in Baghdad right now to find a way to do that, then we're going to have to step in and do exactly what I've suggested.
Dire consequences tee up the next big headline that I want you to comment on. Please play the sound from the interview about whether or not we're at war.
Are you saying that this is not really a war?
Well, what I'm saying is that we are assisting Iraq in a very real battle that's taking place on their soil with their troops. But we are providing air support. And it is in our interest to do that because ISIL represents sort of a hybrid of not just a terrorist network, but one with territorial ambitions and some of the strategy and tactics of an army. This is not America against ISIL.
Do you agree, or are we at war?
Well, in the first instance, fatwa has been handed down basically by ISIL against the United States, where they say they're at war with us. But clearly, What we're trying to do is put together an international coalition here so that we keep the focus on the fact that this is not just the United States. This is the Gulf states, this is Jordan, this is every country in the region, every ethnic group in the region that is in fact threatened directly by these beheadings and by the mass murder. And so I understand the strategy in terms of insisting that this is an international coalition, but at the same time, clearly they've declared war on the United States and on Europe. And that's the reality from ISIL's perspective.
Right, but forget about them, because they're not supposed to be driving this game. It's supposed to be
right.
about the Arabs. They're not really driving the game. So now it's about the U.S., and that means it's you who's driving the game. If it is really war, no matter what the president says, and of course he's got a great mind and he may be being accurate, but impractical on some level. That's Congress's job, to declare war. If you guys are going to arm the Yazidis, why don't you just come back, meet, debate, and make one strong decision about what you want to do in this situation?
We will come back and meet and debate. And indeed, the Speaker of the House indicated that if the President asks for, he is the Commander-in-Chief, if he asks for an authorization of the use of force, if he asks for what you're calling for, Congress will bring that up. What Congress has done, as we know, is pass an authorization for the specific request the President made, and that was bipartisan, and it was passed by a large margin. So, to some extent, we attempt to do this with one voice when we're engaged in foreign policy. And given that fact, it is incumbent upon the Commander-in-Chief to lay out the strategy that he wants, and so far as he's done that, we have given him those tools.
But you don't need the President to make a decision about whether or not you want to declare war or not under the Constitution.
We do not need the President, but we're not dealing here with a government, a foreign government. We're dealing with something which is a terrorist network. And in the past, when we've dealt with a terrorist network, let's look at the actions we've taken in Yemen, for example, or in the mountains of Pakistan against al-Qaeda. This is a larger extension of al-Qaeda. In a way, it's a new metamorphosis. I mean, they use the internet as their caliphate to recruit, but it's the same ideology and it's the same fealty to the same notion of eventually having the caliphate. It's just that they don't want to wait. They want it right now. So when you're dealing with this kind of a threat, what's the best strategy? We're going to debate this when we go back. I've got Democrats and Republicans on my committee that all have views on this. We're going to see if we can come to another conclusion besides the one we already reached with the authorization we already passed. And if we need to expand the scope, we'll do it. But where we don't want this to go is with the 82nd Airborne being deployed into that region. And I think that's pretty clear. That's a bipartisan position that we don't want to see us do that if the and we've got a very real alternative, to go back to my original point. Arm the Kurds, arm the Christians, arm the Yazidis, arm those Sunnis who want to resist ISIS. It is their battle. Give them the tools and the air support that we should be providing.
Chairman, it's a plan. Meet on it, debate it, vote on it, because that's the leadership the people need. I appreciate you being on the show.
Chris, thank you.
I do want just one note for people to know about the chairman. He is on Wednesday holding a hearing into the situation of Sergeant Andrew Tamarisi, who's being held in Mexico. He's still there. We're following that story. Thank you for holding the hearing.
Thank you,
We'll be
Chris.
following that as well.
Very good.
A lot of news.